Welcome to JAT Chat, presented by the Journal of Athletic Training, the official journal of the National Athletic Trainers Association. I'm Dr. Kara Radzak, assistant professor at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and the host of JAT Chat. The purpose of today's event is to provide further information on the recently published manuscript in the November issue of JAT entitled Work-Family Conflict of Collegiate and Secondary School Athletic Trainers Who Are Parents. Today, I'm joined by the manuscript's lead author, Dr. Stephanie Singe, Associate Professor and Academic Coordinator for Exercise Science at the University of Connecticut. And I'm also joined by a guest co-host today, Kristin McKenney, an athletic trainer at Emerson College in Boston. Kristin and Stephanie, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
So the first question that I want to ask you, Stephanie, is why should non-parents read this manuscript?
That's a great question. So we know that really work-life conflict, work-life balance, those concerns really are happening regardless of whether you're married or whether you have children. So the reality of it is, although this really looked at parents and the unique challenges that parents face balancing kind of the demands of an athletic trainer in the more traditional setting and simultaneously being parents, I mean, the take-home messages can really be transferred by someone that doesn't have children and still has to manage other things outside of just being an athletic trainer.
Thank you. And Kristin, give us a little bit more information about your background, your work and life.
All right. So I've been working at the collegiate level for 6 years now, all of that at Division III. And before that, I spent 6 years working as a high school AT. I find this topic really personally relevant since I am a mother to a 3-year-old, and my husband is also an athletic trainer. So it definitely hits home in a lot of ways for us.
So Stephanie, can you give us some definitions to start off with today's talk? What are the differences between work and family conflict and work-family balance?
Great. So really, it's just a perspective. So conflict means that you're having conflict. There's issues that are going on in terms of balancing your life. And then the work-life balance concept is really more of a harmony kind of perspective. So I really try to stress that, everyone's work-life balance is different. It's very individualized, but that work-life balance is not equity in time invested in different roles, but the opportunity to engage in those roles. So really the conflict results when you don't feel like you're able to adequately spend time or devote energy and resources to other life roles. And so that's really the conflict piece. And then balance is really meaning that you are able to gain satisfaction and opportunity to engage in different life roles.
And what different types of conflict are there?
Yep. So there's really 3 kinds. There's time, behavioral, and strain. But time often is the most conflict that we see. For athletic trainers, we're always having to work 60 plus hours a week. So really the time-based conflict is the most. And that's where we don't have enough time to meet all the demands of our different roles.
So Kristin, can you give us some real-world examples? Where has time conflict come to play with you and Mike, your husband?
A lot of it for us stems around the sort of inflexibility of schedules sometimes. There's just certain times where we both need to be at work, and it is not always during the 9 to 5 hours, which makes it really, really challenging as a parent.
And Stephanie, you kind of touched on that as you were introducing the topic in the manuscript. Give us a little bit more background on why you were interested in looking at this research question.
Right. So the reality of it is that in the early research with work-life balance, we really only looked at it using a small, short scale, and it didn't really address the 3 areas that conflict can result in. And, I think we can surmise that time is often the most the precursor to work-life conflict. And so it's kind of like, but we didn't have any data to support that there was more than, these other factors and these other conflicts that were happening. So that's sort of the start of it, is that we kind of used this newer scale that had just come out to kind of see if we could reassess conflict and see if anything really changed in terms of the earlier work of my dissertation, which came out in 2006. So just, that really is why we decided that we needed to do this. And in the past, we've always looked at college or high school in different studies, but never in the same sample. So that was a nice thing to do, is to kind of have the traditional setting grouped into one, where time seems to be the largest of the issues.
Give us some more information about your participant demographics.
Yeah, so we had a large sample size in terms of that. And so the requirement was that they had to be providing patient care for at least 50% of their job-related responsibilities, and that they had at least one child. And so that was really the demographic. Some of the research out there is that support is the number one reason athletic trainers are able to kind of balance their workload. And that is, again, regardless if they're male or female, regardless if they're married, regardless if they have children. But on a personal standpoint, I'm a mom. And so I do know that there are challenges to finding work-life balance when you have kids. And so I think we just wanted to kind of see from a parent's perspective how work-life balance is happening, and how is that when you're balancing it. So it also stems from this concept of work-family guilt. So typically speaking, moms really want to be good moms and want to be really good athletic trainers. And so that mindset is really not congruent. So when, if they're missing work, then they feel bad. And if they're, missing a family obligation, then they feel bad. So it's kind of this idea of guilt, like where you wish that you were somewhere that you can't be. And so that was part of the reason that we wanted to kind of start looking at this, is parents typically seem to have more guilt. And that was the start of why we wanted to include parents in this demographic.
Oh yeah. Mom guilt's not a thing at all, is it?
I feel guilty right now that I'm downstairs, I'm loving this, but I'm like, I can hear my baby crying. So yeah, it's definitely, there is guilt. It happens. And so really what we're also kind of finding is that athletic trainers have this strong professional identity, right? So professional identity means that I resonate with the role of an athletic trainer. I want to do a good job at that. And so that in itself leads to conflict because when they do miss out on work obligations, they feel bad. And then we also are starting to understand that athletic trainers have a strong personal identity, meaning when they're a mom or a dad, they also resonate with that role too. And then that's the idea of the conflicts happening because they have guilt. And really the primary reason is that they don't have enough time in their day to do everything.
Yeah. And you mentioned social support being able to facilitate this work-life balance. Can you provide some descriptions of what are the different aspects of social support?
Yeah, so there's two components. It's type and where that support comes from. So where it comes from is friends, family, spouse, coworkers, supervisor. So that's sort of where it comes from. And we know obviously within the workplace, having a supervisor that believes in work-life balance, who facilitates it, role models it, is really important. And we also know that kind of the idea of coworkers is really important. So this idea of, when there's your inflexible schedule idea. So this is when having a coworker who can cover you. If you already had plans that day and you don't want to kind of miss out on it, you could ask a coworker to cover your shift, so to speak, that day. And so that is providing it. And the type of support they're providing is really tangible. So basically they're providing services or goods. And that's really like having childcare, that kind of stuff is really considered support. But the other kind of support is just kind of camaraderie and compassion and empathy, right? So when someone is having shared life experiences, struggles and successes, if I can commiserate with them, if I can celebrate with them, that also feels good and I feel supported. So those are the types of social support that are out there in terms of, what an athletic trainer needs to be successful.
So Kristin, where do you find social support?
I think that's definitely an area where I personally struggle, and I'm sure many athletic trainers do. And especially within the last year with not being able to necessarily see people in person as much as we would have. I think using, video calls and social media has actually been really important. I feel like I'm lucky and I've got a work environment where I do get a lot of that social support. I have coworkers that I can, switch practice coverage with if my son is sick or daycare is closed today because there's a snowstorm. So it's definitely there. And I think really being able to look for it and push for it is important. Again, like the supportive bosses, supportive coworkers is huge for athletic trainers.
And to give some background to everybody listening, Kristin and I did our masters together and became very good friends. And so her son's a little bit older than my son. And I definitely feel that ability to commiserate sometimes helps a ton. Just somebody who understands that you're sharing your experience and it might sound like complaining, but you wouldn't trade it for the world. You just need to get it out there.
It's the venting.
Yeah, that shared experience and finding somebody like that, I think for me personally is a really great social support system.
Yes, so being all the way across the country.
Yeah, exactly. Well, two things that are important. One, we're not really good at asking for help. So that is one thing that I really say with, it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to delegate. And so it kind of goes into this concept of professional advocacy or self-advocacy. So part of that is communicating your needs and being okay with, saying I need help. And then the idea of the mantra, it takes a village, like we have to recognize that we're in a field that does demand a lot of us. And so sometimes we're going to need multiple people to help us in terms of being successful in any role we kind of assume.
So let's dive a little bit more into what did you guys find? Was there any findings that surprised you, Stephanie?
Well, I feel like sometimes because I live it, I don't necessarily get shocked by a lot of my results. But I think it's important because, we need evidence to support kind of our decision making. So that's what's kind of great about this. I think that I maybe was a little surprised that it was only time that really was an issue, because a lot of times in sport organizations, the incongruence really of our healthcare hat in a sport organization where they want to win at all costs, or, the idea is that we push until we can't. So I was sort of surprised that we didn't find more behavioral based or strain based conflict. But the idea that you need support in your workplace, you need support at home was definitely great to find. I think that, this concept of job sharing is really important in a mindset. I think, when I talk to my students about it, obviously COVID has brought this to light, but, I just had a baby 3 months ago, and the person that I didn't see the same doctor every time I went to an appointment. And in fact, another OBGYN service delivered Chance. And so I'd never met them, but I had trust that I was going to receive great patient care. And that's sort of the same thing for athletic trainers. I think we have to be able to accept that our coworkers can provide the same level of care that we can, and be interested in that. At the secondary school setting, it's a little bit more challenging when they're the sole athletic trainer. And some of the things that I've learned in that process is like building in per diem coverage. Or just effectively communicating these are the days that I'm not available, and kind of training your coaches and the athletic director on protocols that can be put in place to support the fact that if it's an emergency, call 911. And so us as athletic trainers have to be able to say that we can model that and that we believe in that. And that also will help us kind of create some balance.
So one of the things that you touched on is that so many people say secondary school setting is like the family-friendly setting, right? What did you find that either supports or refutes this characterization?
So I think the reason that it's always viewed as family-friendly is because of the competitive side, right? So it's often this concept of work-family integration, where at the secondary school setting, family is allowed to be integrated more often into the day, meaning that they're often on the sidelines with sporting events. So that was sort of why I think a lot of times people thought it was family friendly. Also, the concept of the hours, meaning like you don't go in until 2:00 in the afternoon and you're done by 6 or 7 o'clock. But, the idea is that family friendly actually means that your workplace is conducive to having, time to spend with your family. And so it's really about the policies that are implemented, and those are formal and informal. So if you have a supervisor that recognizes like for the last 5 days, you haven't been home for dinner, and facilitates an opportunity to go home to be with your family. That's an informal, work-life balance, family-friendly policy. Or if you have the opportunity to go home early after, a long couple weeks, like the idea of that, it's like, you want to make sure that you have family-friendly policies in place. But I don't know that the secondary versus the college is any different. It really is just about the workplace philosophy and culture that's around. So we didn't really find any differences in terms of secondary versus, the college setting.
So Kristin, go ahead.
I was going to say that definitely tracks with my experience, having worked in both. And granted, I worked in the secondary setting before I was a parent. But I mean, the jobs that my husband and I had at that time, there's no way we would have been able to manage having a child. I mean, so much of how we make it work right now is our current employers.
So what policies and what even informal things have really helped you guys?
So for me personally, I'm a staff of 3. And the way we set up our practice coverage is that we all rotate. We have teams that we're the primary point person for, but just because my women's soccer team is practicing doesn't mean I have to be the one at that practice. So that does allow us, I can go home early some days. Some days if there's not much going on, we might just go in for some hours to do rehabs in the clinic, and there might not be any practice coverage for me that day. And my other 2 coworkers are handling everything. So really having that flexibility on like a week-to-week basis has helped drastically for all of us with life and work balance. So.
And one of the other things that you, Stephanie, had the hypothesis was that females would have a greater amount of conflict than males, but this was not true. Expand upon this.
Yeah, so I think, it's starting to, work-life balance is not a male-female issue. What it is just our perspective on work-life balance. So what may cause conflict for a male may be different for a female. So I still do think that, generally speaking, women, it's kind of that the stereotype that women want to be at home, women want to be able to do everything well, still kind of leads to that. But I think because of the culture that we're in today, men and women both have to work. Men and women both want work-life balance. I think that's really the shift that has really happened. So, I mean, I wasn't shocked that we didn't find differences. I thought maybe we would because of the parent piece, right? The parent piece really made me think that women would feel the pressure. But we're starting to find that I was going back to that concept of professional identity and personal identity, and we're seeing that men and women, once they assume a parent role, really identify strongly with both. And so therefore they want to be at home, but they also want to be at work. So that's why we didn't find differences.
I'm definitely curious, and I don't know if this is something you've looked at or would look at in the future, but it almost feels like, or I almost wonder if there's a generational difference there. If you look at young parents now versus either older ATs or even like retired ATs and their experiences. So I know it's something that my husband personally feels very validated by this study because I know he feels a lot of that work-life conflict, and so much emphasis is put on like moms and the mom guilt and, our struggles, which is valid. But he feels a lot of that too as a dad, and there's just not always attention put on that because it's just expected that they'll be working.
Yeah, so you bring up a great point. It really is the shift in the millennial generation and their perspective on work-life balance and wanting to, to have that. So that is what we're starting to see as we start to see the younger groups. We don't have an actual study that has compared older, because we would be requiring the participant to reflect versus actually engage in that. But that has come up in conversation, is that, today's parent, it's a generational thing where they want more work-life balance, and it's less likely that the woman is staying at home. And so, or that the adage that if you were going to be successful, you couldn't have a family, right? So that's sort of going away, that we can do it all. But like I said, you require a team around you to make that happen.
And Kristin, what are some other things that really hit home for you when reading this manuscript?
Honestly, one of the things that I really focused in on, I know you said that there was more time-based conflict. But I thought it was interesting. I noticed that there was still a fair amount in the strain-based, which like I find really interesting, and specifically that like people have a harder time sort of shutting off work when they're at home versus the opposite way. And I know I'm the same way. Like I can, if my son's at daycare, if he's home with his dad, I'm not too worried about him when I'm at work. I can kind of turn that part of my brain off. But if there's something from work that's bothered me that day, it's really difficult to turn that off when I'm at home and trying to spend time with my family.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to the two theories are separation and integration. And really, it's okay to integrate your home into your workday just because of the amount of time it requires. But there really needs to be a separation when you're at home to really enjoy being at home or whatever it may be, whatever that activity is. It doesn't necessarily just being a parent, but you really have to disengage. And a lot of times that's what I talk about in my talks is like, right, so you just have to find time. We set goals for our athletes and our patients. We should set goals for ourselves and prioritize ourselves. And I think that's one thing as a parent. I say this as a mom too, but like as a parent in general, we really need to make sure that we're having self-care of ourselves, because then we can't take good care of our kids. And then that spills over, right? If I'm not taking care of myself at home, then how can I be a good athletic trainer and care for my patients as well? So it kind of goes both ways, but reality of it is that it's okay to let home spill over into work. But really when you're at home, it's much more important to shut that work roll off. It's hard because we love our jobs, but if we want to stay rejuvenated and refreshed, it's really important to kind of do that.
Stephanie, what other suggestions you have based upon this work and other work that you're doing to help with those that employ AT parents?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the first thing, it comes from employers, but it also comes from the individual itself. So for the employer, really, you have to listen to your staff's needs or your athletic trainers, needs and kind of identify that. But as the parent, that you have to be an effective communicator to your employer to let them know what you want. So I talk about self-advocacy and really the way that works is that you as an individual have to reflect on your roles in your life. So you have a professional identity and you have a personal identity and you have roles within those. And so you have to do some self-reflection. And part of that self-reflection is how do they prioritize those on a daily basis? So, today, right now, I'm engaged in my work role and that's taking priority. Tomorrow, maybe I have less of a work role that's required and I can spend more time in my other life roles. So it's really important on that part. But then once I reflect on what's important to me and what roles require my time and effort and provide me with value and enrichment, I then kind of have to move towards to communicating when I need help. So whether that's today I said, hey, honey, I need you to watch the baby for a couple hours while I do X, Y, and Z. Or it's talking to my employer about, hey, I need this time off because I have to go to a doctor's appointment. You have to communicate what your needs are and to do that. And then the leadership piece of the final part of self-advocacy really is that you have to lead yourself. You have to be able to, set good, strong examples. And part of that is right. So if you are at home and you have to shut off your emails and you have to shut off your texts, if you're going to really engage in that. And so on the flip side, you have to be surrounded by leaders who also value work-life balance and work for individuals that value you and value your time away from your job.
That's hard. I wanted you to give me a magic bullet. Self-reflection is hard. It's uncomfortable and I don't
really
like
hard. It is really hard. But I mean, so other things in terms of maybe some easy things is, right, every day schedule 30 minutes for yourself. And that means you. No one else can interrupt that time and protect that time. And that could be meditation. It could be going for a run. It could be reading a book. It could be taking a bath. Whatever it may be, like every day, try to schedule 30 minutes for yourself that's independent of anyone else asking for what you need. And then some of the other stuff is just important self-care, making sure that you're eating healthy, you're getting exercise, you're sleeping well. I say that as I get like 4 hours of sleep last night, but it's temporary. But again, so just some basic things of self-care are really definitely important. And part of that also is surrounding yourself with really good people. You mentioned that you guys talk about what it's like to be parents. That's so important to make sure you kind of have those social connections. They really help in terms of work-life balance.
So do you have any favorite resources or books to help us develop those skills of self-advocacy? I'm putting you on the spot here.
Putting me on the spot. I don't actually have a book in terms of that. So one of the great things is that my support is my husband, and we both believe in work-life balance, and we often have these conversations. And that was the start of me looking up and kind of really understanding the idea of self-advocacy. But honestly, journaling on a regular basis to see what's important to you. We make to-do lists. So that's also a really important piece of the puzzle is if you could write a to-do list every day to make sure you're on that is really important. But in terms of just resources, the NATA position statement has a lot of great recommendations. And, the strength of that comes from, the qualitative nature. And obviously, as we move forward and continue to understand this, the NATA has the research initiative, and they're calling for more research on work-life balance. And we really need more longitudinal and quantitative data. But at the same time, the position statement is really based on the stories and the experiences and the narratives of the membership. And so that really tells you what's been working and what's not. So that's a great resource to help you kind of work towards a better work-life balance, especially advocating for yourself through your employer.
Thank you. So, Kristin, any final thoughts before we kind of wrap up on anything that sparked your interest that you really want to try to explore in your own setting?
I feel like we've covered so much of it. I think I would be a little bit curious to see kind of differences amongst like the types of positions people hold. I know, again, looking at like my own situation, me being just a practicing athletic trainer and my husband being in a director position, he's got a lot of administrative duties that I don't have, which contributes to his stress and making his balance a little bit more challenging. So I think that's definitely something going forward that would be interesting, I think.
He can learn to delegate to reduce his stress.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And then, Stephanie, what have you learned from this manuscript, and where is this research going?
Yeah. So this study was actually a very large mixed method study. So the data that's presented in this particular article is really the quantitative findings and looking at how, basically the work-family conflict scale. But one of the things, obviously, the next step is really understanding work-family guilt and work-family conflict through that. So that's where that's moving. My doctoral student is currently looking at work-life balance, work-family conflict, and adding a piece of family roles, family values. So this piece of like how, again, that personal role, how strongly do I identify with your non-work roles and looking at that. And we're looking at it in a longitudinal manner. So she's collected data, interestingly, through COVID, and then we'll collect again data in May. And interestingly, part of the COVID piece is that professional identity is growing for the athletic trainer, meaning that people are seeing their value. But at the same time, there are some athletic trainers, because the role is changing, they're also feeling like they are losing a little bit of their identity, and they're struggling with work-life balance because now they're at home trying to provide some telehealth, or they don't know when they're going in, and now their kids are at home. And so it's creating a different kind of work-life balance. So really the next steps are really longitudinal research, more quantitative mixed method studies to really understand the experiences of large groups of individuals, but also still keeping it where it's really an individualized pursuit for work-life balance.
Yeah, you mentioned it earlier, but sharing the story, and there's a lot of value in hearing that. The numbers are one thing, but that was one of the things that came up for me is I want to hear the stories behind this and what were the reasonings why versus just there's differences or not differences, right?
Right. So really the story is that I need to have support. I do love my job. I love being a parent, or I love being whatever I'm not and at work. And so, those two passions fuel happiness and enrichment, but they also fuel conflict because they want to be good at both roles.
That doesn't hit home at all, does it, Kristin?
Oh, no. Yeah, totally applies.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much for joining me today. Kristin, I really appreciate it. And Dr. Singe, completely look forward to seeing what more you guys have coming out of this, because it is sorely needed. And thank you again for doing the work. And this manuscript, as well as all of the Journal of Athletic Training's offerings, are available open access online. Thank you guys again for joining me.
Thank you.